The losses suffered by the Russian army between February 24, 2022 and October 31, 2024 are staggering. 9,156 tanks and 18,470 armored combat vehicles. These figures were announced by the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. However, even when considering only the losses confirmed through photographic or video evidence, the numbers remain dire: 3,536 tanks and 1,723 combat vehicles. These losses exceed the total military inventories of some nations. When compared to the combined military strength of European countries, this is an alarming statistic for Russian leader Vladimir Putin. Russia's massive stockpile of tanks has been rapidly depleted due to Putin's missteps, bringing the situation to a critical level for the nation. What was once Putin's strongest asset at the beginning of the war, a vast reserve of tanks, has now been reduced to a mere shadow of its former self. The dwindling number of tanks and armored vehicles available for Russian troops in their invasive operations is pushing Russia's arsenal into a state of crisis. But why is this inventory depleting so quickly, and what is its current status? Today we will examine this situation clearly and in detail. First, why is this stockpile, or what we might even call a military base, so important? To understand, we need to start by uncovering the secrets of Russia's military storage practices. The history of these military facilities, known as Central Tank Reserve Bases, dates back to World War II. These bases have continued their crucial operations for Russia since the mid-20th century. The monster tanks of the Soviet era evolved over time, fueling and sustaining this inventory. A French source, l'Institut Action Résilience, conducted a study revealing that Russia's military infrastructure consists of 28 major storage and repair sites. Among them, 24 are considered the military heart of Russia. 9 of these bases, located primarily in Russia's central and eastern regions, are specifically designated for the storage of tanks and armored vehicles. However, these regions are not merely storage sites. They play a vital role in supporting operational military units, particularly in the urgent repair and readiness of equipment for reuse. These areas are managed directly by the General Directorate of Armored Vehicles, which operates under Russia's Ministry of Defense. Yet Putin's administration has struggled to effectively utilize these facilities, especially in the ongoing invasion of Ukraine that has spanned several years. The task of preserving and maintaining the tank fleet appears to fall far short of expectations. Each Central Tank Reserve Base operates with a maintenance battalion responsible for the storage and upkeep of tanks. These battalions take their directives directly from the Russian General Staff and tailor their operations to the specific needs of certain tank models. The bases are expected to employ advanced storage technologies such as dry air systems to extend the lifespan of armored vehicles. However, the effectiveness of these processes is highly questionable. Details on this will follow shortly. A typical Central Tank Reserve Base consists of an administrative building, accommodation areas for soldiers, maintenance hangars, and organized storage zones. In addition, there are scrap yards for decommissioned vehicles and, often, a refueling area. To facilitate logistics, railway loading zones are located nearby, ensuring that operations continue uninterrupted. Now, we're about to dive even deeper into this topic. Before we proceed, don't forget to support our channel and leave a like if you're enjoying the video. We're also eager to hear your thoughts in the comments below. So, where are these bases located? Let's get into it. Currently, 9 Central Tank Reserve Bases are spread across Russia's various military districts. The Western Military District hosts only one base, the 22nd base in Bai, Kostroma Oblast. The Central Military District is home to 5 bases, the 349th base in Topchika, Altai Krai, the 1311th base in Verkhnaya Pishma, Sverdlovsk Oblast, the 2456th base in Yarkovo, Novosibirsk Oblast, the 2544th base in Kozulka, Krasnoyarsk Krai, and the 6018th base in Kamyshlov, Sverdlovsk Oblast. Meanwhile, the Eastern Military District houses 3 bases, the 111th Base in Komsomolsk-on-Amur, Khabarovsk Krai, the 769th Base in Ulan-Ude, Buryatia, and the 1295th Base in Arsenyev, Primorsky Krai. These bases form the backbone of Russia's tank reserves and hold significant strategic importance. In this video, however, we'll focus on the 769th Base in Ulan-Ude. This base is not just a component of Russia's military storage system. It also reflects the current challenges and changes in military logistics. The 769th Base serves as a strategic hub for organizing, maintaining, and mobilizing stored equipment when necessary. However, emerging images and reports reveal a deteriorating state at this facility. A lack of maintenance for tanks and armored vehicles, insufficient logistical support, and general infrastructure issues have severely undermined the functionality of the inventory housed here. With these details in mind, let's take a closer look at the present and future role of the 769th Base. Previously known as the 227th Storage and Repair Base, the 769th Central Tank Reserve Base was once referred to as Russia's military heart, as we mentioned earlier in the video. Located near Ulan-Ude, the capital of Buryatia, this base spans an impressive 3.86 square miles and was designed to symbolize military strength. Before the war, it was officially regarded as the largest tank storage facility in Russia, and it remains so to this day. It is worth noting the types of tanks stored at this facility. The primary tank models include the T-72 and T-62. Variants such as the T-62M, T-72A, T-72B, and T-72 OBR 1989 make up a significant portion of the inventory. Now, let us dive into the architecture of the base itself. It is divided into three main sections. The northern and southern areas are used for vehicle storage. The central section is dedicated to logistics and resupply operations, while the side areas are equipped with spare parts and repair workshops essential for maintaining the inventory. This layout is integral to the base's operations. Interestingly, transitioning from one section to another is not as straightforward as it might seem. Why? Because each area is enclosed by triple-layered security fences, which make intersection movement extremely challenging. To move from one section to another, personnel must first exit through a security checkpoint, follow the main road, and re-enter through another checkpoint. While Russia's military infrastructure does not have a reputation for efficiency, this setup seems to highlight poor military management. What complicates matters further is the terrain surrounding the 769th Base. Situated in a mountainous region with uneven ground, the facility is severely limited in terms of enclosed storage areas. As a result, most vehicles at the base are left exposed outdoors. Only a few maintenance garages and small shelters are scattered across the site. This significantly compromises both the efficiency and security of the base. Now we need to take a step back in time. How did this facility, once referred to as Russia's military heart and a symbol of national pride, fall into such a dire state? The history of the 769th Central Tank Reserve Base dates back to the 1960s. Its first official mention in the West appeared in a 1964 CIA report, published shortly after the Sino-Soviet split. During this period, the Soviet Union faced increasing tensions and perceived threats from China, leading to significant military buildups. The CIA report described traces of a vast complex filled with massive barracks spread over a large area. Unfortunately, today, most of these original structures have almost completely disappeared. Some of these Soviet-era buildings may be familiar from old films, resonating deeply with those who appreciate the historical fabric of military sites. The signs of decay at this base began to emerge in the early 2000s. The southern section turned into a storage area for reserve vehicles, while the northern section housed vehicles in better condition. The contrast was striking. The northern section resembled a VIP area, while the southern section felt like an abandoned city. Curiously, during that time, nothing was actually stored in the northern section. Despite this, the area was still reserved for an unspecified purpose, making it seem like a black hole. This peculiarity perfectly encapsulated the dysfunction of the post-Soviet Russian military structure. Units existed on paper but operated with no actual functionality. In practice, their activity was virtually non-existent. The year 2008 marked a turning point for the Russian military, but this was not the beginning of a success story. It was the onset of the system's collapse. That year saw the launch of a major military restructuring effort known as the Serdyukov Reform. This reform was not merely a series of superficial changes, but a revolution in its own right. By 2012, Russia aimed to reduce its troop numbers to 1 million, delivering a decisive blow to the traditional structure of its military. The number of military academies was slashed from 65 to just 10, and officer numbers were dramatically reduced. But the real question is, why? Up until that point, the Russian military was bloated with bureaucracy and inefficiency. It consisted of 24 divisions, 16 motorized rifle brigades, 3 tank regiments, and 5 machine gun artillery regiments. Yet, in reality, only 5 of these units were fully functional, with just 13% of the army being combat-ready. The so-called 24-division military was, in truth, little more than a handful of effective units. This inflated structure became increasingly unmanageable, forcing Russia into a complete military overhaul. As a result, both military strategies and structures began to crumble at the very moment Russia was trying to rebuild its military strength and capacity. This marked the beginning of a profound loss for Russia as it struggled to create something new while letting go of what had defined its military for decades. The Serdyukov reforms were nothing short of a revolution for Russia's military organization. Out of 24 divisions, 23 were either eliminated, merged, or rendered functionless, with their budgets entirely wiped out. What remained were just 4 tank brigades and 35 motorized rifle brigades. But what was the goal? To create a military that was faster, more agile, smaller in size, but more effective. Did it succeed? The number of ground forces units plummeted from 1,890 to just 172. This was Russia's attempt to build a force that was always ready. However, this transformation led to an accumulation of Soviet-era remnants. Those who cheered the collapse of the Soviet Union, shouting, "Good riddance," played a central role in what became the beginning of the end. This is where the 769th Central Tank Reserve Base comes into play. The old Soviet-era tanks were left to gather dust, but there was no longer enough personnel to operate them. The base essentially became a massive graveyard of obsolete equipment. By 2011, the base was overflowing with tanks. Supplies kept piling up, but what was done with them? In 2012, Russia launched an ambitious destruction plan targeting 10,000 tanks. This plan starkly revealed the dire state of the Russian military and how years of stockpiling outdated technology had led to its decline. Far from being a military reform, this was one of the most glaring examples of Russia's historical military collapses. Here, we must address a significant misconception, the myth that Russia still possesses tens of thousands of tanks. The reality is far from this fabricated narrative. Most figures circulating online date back to the Soviet Union era. This means that many of the tanks credited to Russia are actually property of former Soviet republics like Kazakhstan, Belarus, or even Ukraine. As of February 24, 2022, estimates suggested that Russia had 17,500 tanks in reserve. However, almost all of these tanks are in disrepair, non-operational, or lack the skilled personnel required to operate them. While these tanks could theoretically be used as a source of spare parts, and many are indeed used this way, labeling them as reserve tanks is a completely misleading tactic and part of a broader propaganda effort. If we look at the real numbers today, it is estimated that only about 6,000 tanks are in usable condition, and even that is questionable. Many of these tanks are in such poor shape that calling them functional is a stretch. The narrative of Russia maintaining a massive tank fleet is nothing more than a fabrication, a manipulation that Putin loves to perpetuate. But that is a topic for another video. Let us continue with this one. By the end of 2022, the 769th Central Tank Reserve Base was reported to house approximately 860 tanks. However, By April 2023, newly released data and analyzed satellite images confirmed that this number had dropped to around 615. Most of these losses included T-72 models, with some T-62 models also disappearing from the inventory. Compared to pre-war numbers, this represents a staggering 70% decrease in the base's inventory. At that time, it was astonishing to witness the rapid disappearance of Soviet-era tanks and armored vehicles from Russia's largest tank storage facility. The worst part? The losses showed no sign of stopping and continued to worsen with each passing day. And here lies a critical point. Even if these tanks were still in storage today, Putin would not have the personnel to operate them after the scale of the losses. This brings us to the end of September 2024 and the latest developments regarding the status of the 769th base. According to the data, the base continues to lose tanks at an alarming rate, marking one of the most significant declines recorded so far. By September 2024, the speed of losses at this facility had reached shocking levels. Between September 2023 and May 2024, the base lost only 48 tanks. However, between May and September, a span of just 4 months, the base recorded a loss of 79 tanks. This translates to an average loss of 20 tanks per month, with the rate of losses tripling in this short period. Such a significant loss in such a brief period demonstrates how quickly Russia's largest tank storage base is being depleted. This not only strikes a devastating blow to the base's inventory, but also highlights the continued weakening of what was once referred to as Russia's military heart. Manipulation and propaganda. Returning to this, Putin attempted to suppress these reports using precisely these methods. How much could winter weather really hinder an entire nation's ability to maintain its tanks? Initially, claims surfaced suggesting that winter conditions disrupted tank maintenance and logistics. However, the data from the summer of 2023 completely debunked this assumption. Between April and September 2023, the number of tanks stored at the base actually increased by 48 units. This unexpected surge surprised many experts. The sudden rise in tank numbers caused significant confusion, prompting questions about why this increase was followed by an accelerated rate of losses. Some analysts speculated that the tanks might have been moved to another base for consolidation. Recent satellite imagery strongly supported this theory, revealing intensive preparations at the base to load tanks onto trains for transport. It appeared that Russia was transferring its tank inventory to a larger base in the west. Moving the tanks westward was not only a strategic step to enable faster deployment to Ukraine, but also an effort to prevent the rapid depletion of tanks remaining at the 769th base. Additionally, the 95th and 111th bases, located east of the 769th, were almost completely emptied by mid-2023. The westward relocation of tanks was part of Russia's broader attempt to preserve its existing military infrastructure. Another explanation is much simpler. Russia could be refurbishing damaged tanks. This theory seems plausible given the massive losses Russia experienced on the Eastern Front in Ukraine during the summer and fall, as it continued its relentless attempts at occupation. However, the pieces of the puzzle do not entirely align. Despite these significant losses, the situation at the 769th base remains unresolved. There are still hundreds of tanks at the base. So how is it that the base is being described as nearly empty? The answer lies in the appalling condition of these tanks. The 769th base not only stores most of Russia's tanks outdoors, but also serves as a glaring example of the massive logistical issues and maintenance failures throughout Russia's military infrastructure. The tanks are not only left unprotected and exposed to the elements, but also showcase the poor management of Russia's military power. In essence, Russia's tank storage strategy has turned into what can only be described as a laughable disaster, tragicomic even. Between the loss of personnel and the loss of equipment, these two factors will undoubtedly play a significant role in Putin's downfall. If everyone agrees that weather plays such a major role, how should we interpret this? Here's the conclusion. A country as vast as Russia, spanning 6.6 million square miles, astonishes the world with its poor choice of storage locations for its tanks. These critical military vehicles have been left exposed to the open air, entirely at the mercy of nature. And the result? Tanks that were once expected to be battle-ready are now almost entirely rusted and reduced to scrap metal. This outcome is far from surprising. In a country with harsh seasonal weather, leaving military vehicles outdoors is nothing short of catastrophic. Rain, snow, wind, these are relentless and destructive forces of nature, and these tanks have been left defenseless against them for years. Many are now in such dire condition due to the weather that redeploying them to the battlefield is nearly impossible. When compared to the United States, which benefits from arid, desert-like environments ideal for preserving tanks, such as the Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Arizona, Russia faces a completely different reality, with storage facilities that have essentially turned into open-air junkyards. Even relatively dry regions like Ulan-Ude, which receives low rainfall, are far from ideal for long-term storage. Half of the tanks stored there have rusted into complete disrepair. In a desperate attempt to mitigate the problem, Russian engineers have resorted to dubious, temporary fixes, such as attaching pipes to tank barrels to pump air. However, let's not forget, this is merely a band-aid solution masking a much larger issue. These tanks have now become a symbol of how disastrously mismanaged Russia's military power has become. What makes the situation even more dire is that a significant portion of the tanks stored at the 769th base have been stripped for parts. This highlights Moscow's desperate reliance on repurposing old, decrepit tanks, a grim reflection of the massive losses they've suffered during the war. As a result, tank hulls without turrets are left to pile up in scrapyards, rendering them almost entirely useless. These tanks are now nothing more than scrap metal, yet they continue to occupy precious storage space and are still counted in the base's overall tank inventory. Russia's risky gamble with its aging military inventory has turned the 769th base into little more than a tank graveyard. However, this base is not just a ghost town filled with abandoned tanks. Other combat vehicles bearing the scars of neglect also lie dormant here. At first glance, looking at the number of combat vehicles stored at the 769th base might give a different impression. For instance, the number of BMP models has remained stable over the past 4 months, currently standing at 509. But let's put this into perspective. This number represents a 45% drop from the pre-war count of 919. Let's be realistic. The remaining BMPs are in no better condition than the tanks. While satellite images don't reveal the full extent of the damage, many of these vehicles are missing their turrets, just like the tanks. Others appear to have been left to the mercy of the elements for years, with hatches left open, exposing the interiors to rain, snow, and wind. These vehicles look less like they're being prepared for action and more like they've been retired to rust away. Each of them once had a purpose, a mission they were meant to fulfill. Now they are little more than abandoned, rusty heaps. For military inventory enthusiasts, this is nothing short of a funeral announcement. A closer examination reveals an even bleaker picture. Nearly 50% of these vehicles show visible damage, rendering them almost entirely unusable, and this assessment is based solely on satellite imagery. According to military sources, only 160 of the remaining BMPs are considered fit to return to service. Even then, there is a significant issue: spare parts and repairs. Given Russia's current economic situation, the cost of refurbishing these vehicles is enormous. It would take almost as much money as building a new tank just to restore these aging BMPs and bring them back into action. An intriguing development has emerged with new images. 19 additional BMPs have suddenly appeared at the base, and their origin is a complete mystery. But here's the real issue. Whether the number of BMPs increases or which ones remain hardly matters. Most of them are BMP-1 models, which are nearly 60 years old. Yes, 60 years. Once celebrated for their firepower and mobility, BMP-1s are now far outclassed by modern armored fighting vehicles. Armed with a 73mm low-pressure gun and a 7.62mm machine gun, these aging vehicles stand no chance against today's cutting-edge armored vehicles. Let's speak frankly. These relics appear destined to remain nothing more than rusty historical artifacts. The BMP-1's design suffers from deeper flaws. Its hull provides protection only against small arms fire and shrapnel, nothing more. Its armor leaves soldiers almost entirely defenseless against modern battlefield threats, making them easy targets in a world of armor-piercing ammunition. It's akin to bringing a knife to a gunfight, an outdated, ineffective strategy that can only lead to defeat. The once-praised mobility of the BMP-1 is now obsolete. Its diesel engine produces just 300 horsepower, which might have been sufficient decades ago, but is utterly inadequate in today's combat scenarios. This vehicle is a relic of a bygone era, representing Soviet-era technology that has failed to keep up with modern warfare. It offers no meaningful contribution to the battlefield today, a stark reminder of the past with no place in the present. And the same applies to the remaining tanks at the 769th base. Most of the T-62 tanks there turned 63 years old in 2024. Yes, you heard that right. These tanks are practically antiques. With a 41-ton body and a crew of 4, the T-62 was once an impressive combat vehicle, but it is now almost entirely outdated. Unfortunately, that is all that remains of these tanks. After 32 months of continuous conflict, Russia's inventory of modern tanks has been nearly exhausted. The Russian army started the war with 2,100 T-72s, 500 T-80s, and 400 T-90s, but most of these are no longer operational. Today, the T-62 is becoming the primary tank type, not only at the 769th base, but across the Russian military as a whole. Putin's flawed chess game continues the misguided strategies of post-Soviet Russian leadership. That is the picture we can see when we examine this base. So, what is the verdict on the 769th Central Tank Reserve Base? The truth is, the situation is grim. Earlier equipment losses were due to the initial stages of the war and subsequent mobilization efforts. But today, the primary driver of these declines is the catastrophic losses sustained on the battlefield. While Putin's human losses continue, the depletion of inventory persists. What remains of the lost equipment is little more than scrap metal or museum artifacts. What happens next, and how far can Putin go with these tanks? What role might Trump play if he gets involved? Share your thoughts and predictions in the comments below. Please don't forget to like the video for us.